Welcome back to the Friday Five for March 3rd, 2023. My name is Andrew Ayers. I'm an estate planning and business law attorney with offices in Edina, Minnesota and New York City. And today we're going to look at 5 quick questions that came up this week in consultations that you may have wondered about as well. Give you some quick answers, some places to get started on these issues. Question number 1. How is a business trust different than a personal trust? So this came up in the context of somebody who'd watched a few of my videos and actually given me a call to discuss his setup of his business and his estate planning goals. And he'd seen some videos and read some information about a business trust and was wondering if that business trust was a good idea for him or if he needed a personal trust. And one of our discussions we had is that these don't necessarily have to be different trusts. So in his context, what he was looking at is using a trust for estate planning purposes, and he was also interested in that trust having the ownership interest in the business that he runs. And in his mind, after reading things online, he believed that he needed to create one trust for himself and then one trust for the business. And in fact, what we can do is we can create one trust that can be that trust that handles your estate planning as well as handling your business interest, in this case an LLC. The benefit of that for him on the LLC side is the ownership interest in the LLC can then pass under the terms of the trust when he dies, and we don't have to worry about distributing or dissolving the LLC automatically upon his death. Question number 2, are my 20-year-old documents still valid? Now this comes up a lot in my consultations, so we're going to come back to it again today. And the short answer is yes, they usually are. Just because a document is X number of years old, 20 years, 30, 40 years old, does not mean that they're not valid. The bigger question you want to ask yourself is that 20-year-old document still reflecting what my wishes are for my estate plan? In this case, we had an old will, an old trust, and then we actually didn't have any of the ancillary documents like powers of attorney. So the trust itself was very straightforward, and actually none of those terms had changed. In the will, we now have grown children, so we're going to make some changes to that because they no longer need the guardianship and trustee provisions for when the children were under the age of 18 at the time they made the will. But otherwise, these documents would be valid. So if they walked out of my office and were hit by a bus, even though they hadn't finished updating their documents, those old 20-year-old documents still would have been valid. Question number 3, when am I legally separated from my spouse? So this came up in the context of a New York consultation this week, and the question is, the two spouses have been living separate and apart for years at this point, and they wanted to know when do they officially become what we call legally separated. In this case, they're concerned about tax issues and concerned about some other financial issues and whether or not they're still legally married. And in this case, to start off with, you are still legally married because they hadn't filed anything with the court. So in New York, at least, to get that legal separation going, when you file your summons complaint with the court, letting the court know that you are seeking a divorce, you can then be considered legally separated. However, the government may not treat you as legally separated if you haven't taken any active steps with your court system to actually demonstrate that you're legally separated and living apart from your spouse. So wherever you are, the most important thing to do is make sure to talk to an attorney so you understand whether or not you are, in fact, legally separated from your spouse. Question number 4 this week, do I need an LLC for my rental property if I'm not using it for a business purpose? So in this context, the client had a question because they own a property that they're renting out to somebody who's just living there. So it's just an apartment they're renting out. And after reading some blogs online and listening to, I think, a podcast, they were concerned because they thought they wanted to put their property into an LLC, but they weren't, as they termed it, using it for business purposes. They thought they had to create that LLC if they were going to use that apartment for business purposes, but all they were doing was renting it out to somebody. And in this situation, you don't need to use that property for business purposes to set up an LLC. So what we did is we went through the various advantages of creating an LLC for asset protection and protecting your personal liability, which is really what the client was looking for. But at some point they had come across some information that led them to believe that you had to be running a business to be able to create an LLC for a property to rent it out. So if you have residential property, maybe it's a house from before your marriage. A pretty common situation I run into is 2 spouses, they get married. Before they got married, they each lived in the house. So they decide to live in the wife's house. What do we want to do with the husband's house? Now, some people will sell it, but these days a lot of people, with the housing market being what it is, will want to rent out the husband's house. And in that situation, what we can do to give you that extra layer of protection is move husband's house into an LLC, and you essentially are running it like a business, and you can rent it out to somebody to live in. Question number 5 for this week: do I need a business trust in addition to my LLC? And so this then ties into question number 1 for this week. The client I was discussing who wanted a trust and wasn't sure if it was a business or a personal trust. And in this situation, we went through what are the advantages and disadvantages of using a business trust for your LLC. And one of the main advantages, of course, would be that ownership interest in the LLC can then pass along through your trust to your beneficiaries, to your heirs, to your other members of your family, if that's what you'd like to do. Now, another thing you can look at if you're worried about inheritance in your LLC is look at the state you're in and see whether or not the state allows your LLC to have a transfer and death designation. If so, you can have that membership interest be transferred on death to somebody else, but not every state allows that. So in states where that's not allowed, one of the things we can do is use a trust to then have your LLC interest be passed along to the next generation through your trust. So those are the 5 questions from this week. Here in Minnesota, it's slowly warming up and we're looking forward to spring break. So there's a link in the description to ask questions for future episodes if you'd like. If you found this helpful, I'd appreciate it if you hit the like or share button, and you can subscribe on YouTube or Facebook, or you can watch them on LinkedIn. And wherever you are, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you next Friday.